Good morning. I'm Alec Velshi. You're watching MS Now election coverage. We've got major breaking news coming out of Colorado in the 1st electoral district. Melat Quiros has defeated the long-term incumbent Diana DeGette in the Colorado's 1st district, which is the city of Denver, the entire city of Denver. 78% of the vote is in right now, and the Associated Press has been able to project that Melat Quiros has won. Her lead has grown in the last hour over Diana DeGette. Diana DeGette has been a member of the United States House of Representatives since 1996. Melat Quiros was born the following year. Melat Quiros has not been alive for as long as Diana DeGette has been a member of Congress. Diana DeGette is now the 5th member of Congress, or 5th incumbent who has lost their primary in this election cycle. The 5th Democrat, that is, by the way. 2 of them were in Texas, but those were redistricting fights where incumbents or former incumbents were up against each other. The last 2 were last week in New York, where Adriana Espaillat in New York 13 and Dan Goldman in New York 10 were defeated by insurgents who were supported by the Democratic Socialists of America and Mayor Zoran Mamdani. Melat Quiros is supported by the Democratic Socialists of America and Bernie Sanders. So this is now the 3rd incumbent who has been met by a challenger and has defeated the incumbent. So Diana DeGette will not be the candidate, will not be the representative for Colorado's 1st district starting in January of 2027. Melat Quiros will be the candidate moving forward into the elections on November the 3rd. I want to tell you what else has gone on across Colorado tonight. This is another bit of news that was not expected. Michael Bennet, the longtime senator, was running for governor. He lost to Phil Weiser, who is the state's attorney general. Got into a bit of a bitter argument about which one has done more to fight Donald Trump. Phil Weiser, the attorney general, quite handily defeating Michael Bennet. 85% of the vote in right now, and Phil Weiser ahead by 10 points. Let's look at the Senate primary in Colorado. This is another interesting story. John Hickenlooper, the senator and prior governor of the state, has won with 85% of the vote in, but look at that margin. This is a sitting United States senator challenged by Julie Gonzalez, who is a challenger from his left, who got 43.6% of the vote. So you can see that there's a theme developing across a lot of these races across the entire country. There were a lot of people who thought that the New York race was a standout by virtue of how liberal New York is, because in those races in New York, when a Democratic Socialist beat an incumbent, those seats are not going to change hands. It doesn't affect the balance of power in the House of Congress. In this particular case, it's less obvious. When you get to points further west out in the country where the Democratic Socialists do not have the same presence that they have, this becomes a bit more of a question as to the direction of the Democratic Party. Now, a lot of critics have come out and said these kinds of things are dangerous for the party come November, because it'll be used by Republicans to suggest, as Donald Trump has, that the communists are taking over, the socialists are taking over. But there's a lot more nuance to why some of these Democratic Socialists are actually winning. There are a few things at play here. Number one, outside money. What tends to happen is Democratic Socialists share the view of many younger Democrats about U.S. support for Israel, and what tends to happen is the incumbent or the person running against them ends up getting the support of AIPAC and its affiliated groups. So that's one of the things at play. The other one is generational. As I said, Melat Quiros has not been alive for as long as Diana DeGette has been the member of Congress. We've seen that in various races. We saw it in New York's District 13, where Adriana Espaillat lost to a much younger challenger. We saw it in Texas, where Al Green lost to a much younger challenger. There's also this internal debate about moderates versus progressives. Obviously, those who are members of or supported by Bernie Sanders or Zoran Mamdani or the Democratic Socialists of America are progressives. They're on the left side of the party versus the moderates, although I will say Diana DeGette is not thought of as anything other than a progressive. And then fundamentally, there's this fighters versus folders idea, and that may be a lot of the frustration amongst people in the Democratic Party who feel that some of their leadership and their House-endorsed candidates, remember, every incumbent in the Democratic Party is supported by the Democratic Party by default. That that is a position that some Democrats feel the party shouldn't hold. They want the person who they think is going to fight most for them to be elected. The other thing is the Democratic Socialists of America, as part of the Democratic Party, when they're running as Democrats, talk a lot about affordability, which is it is the number one concern that people express right now. The dissatisfaction with Donald Trump as president, the dissatisfaction numbers are highest as it comes to his handling of the economy. The economy and affordability were central campaign issues for Donald Trump, upon which he has not delivered. In some part, that's because of the tariffs that he imposed. In large part, it's because of this war with Iran that nobody was particularly looking for, but that increased the price of fertilizer, diesel, and gasoline. So Democratic Socialists do tend to have policies that are very directly related to housing affordability, to subsidies, to child care, universal health care, funding of health care, higher minimum wages, and those types of very explicit policies, including policies around the climate, that incumbent Democrats, some feel, have not leaned into as heavily as others. In this particular case, though, I will say Diana DeGette has not been a target of people who have not thought she's progressive enough, but Melat Kiros is definitely a lot more progressive. Melat Kiros, by the way, is an immigrant to the United States. She was born in Ethiopia and immigrated to the United States, grew up in the Denver area. But here we have 78% of the vote in, and the Associated Press is able to call her as the victor in that race. I will say that Colorado is one of those interesting places in which the vote is almost all done by mail or in advance. There's very little vote that comes in day of. I did talk about New York, so I just want to remind you of what we were talking about. New York's always a hard one because you got to really zoom in to get the districts. But the two incumbents that went down in New York were Dan Goldman in New York 10, Brad Lander, the challenger, who ran against Zoran Mamdani for mayor of New York, but then the two of them cross-endorsed each other, coming out with a remarkable lead. This is the most decisive lead we've seen in any effort to unseat an incumbent. 66% of the vote to Dan Goldman's 34%. And then up here in New York 13, which is the Harlem and a part of Bronx, Daria Liza Avila Chevalier coming in with 49.4% against Adriano Espaillat, who came in with 46%. Espaillat was the head of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, thought of as the dean of Latino politics in New York. So this was a very big upset. This was the last result we got last Tuesday night. So this is a bit of a pattern. I want to bring in our good friend, Puck contributor Abby Livingston right now. Abby's joining us because Abby and I were together on election night talking about this. Abby, at some point, people are going to wonder what this all is. Is this a trend? Is this a very strong showing by Democratic Socialists? Is it just young people running against more established people? What are you hearing in Washington? Because this is now becoming a thing.
I think it's all of the above, but it is still to be determined on if this is a big sweeping trend for the year. We've seen a lot of Democratic incumbents get reelected already this cycle, but it's looking at what's going forward. And so we're New York and Denver, where Diana DeGette represents, are those just happen to be situational races that are back to back, or will we see more of this? And we do have some incumbents down the road who have tough primaries. The ones that I've been paying attention to are mostly age related. But I think the big takeaway, and I talked to a Colorado Democrat who's been watching all of this, is, 10 years ago, being an incumbent just meant you were assured re-election in your party primary, particularly on the Democratic side. And what this feels like is that name identification and fundraising, the two best benefits of being an incumbent, are now not as strong as they used to be. And possibly, especially with Michael Bennet and DeGette, this Colorado Democrat said to me that the commute to Washington was a problem, that you're not on the ground, you're not being seen in a way, and your challenger is there. And the other thing is that it just further underscores you're part of the establishment, which is just not very popular right now.
Yeah, it's a bit of an albatross. You made a comment to me last Tuesday that stuck out to me, and that is the Democratic Party, as a policy, supports its incumbents, whether or not the challenger is more interesting or younger or better, whatever the case is. And you said that there's a two-way street, right? They feel that by supporting their incumbents, they will get people to run and stick with them. Explain to me the math on that, because there are some people who just would rather the party not put their thumb on the scale.
Well, It is just unheard of in Washington to endorse against a colleague, particularly at the highest levels of leadership. And so I'm just trying to think of an example. I mean, if you are a regular member, you don't want to endorse against a colleague because you may need their help on a bill someday. You might build up a grudge that could come back and haunt you. You certainly don't donate against them. I mean, even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has launched this revolution, I could be misremembering, but I think she's only endorsed against one incumbent, Henry Cuellar, and she really hasn't again. So it's really not a thing that you do to go along to get along. And it also goes along with corporate PACs. They will typically only give to incumbents, and that is sometimes a toxic way to receive money, but they will rarely give against a sitting incumbent on either side.
Abby, hang on for a second. I want to bring in my colleague and great friend, the host of The Weekend, Eugene Daniels. Eugene, I know you're always working the phones, and this it's seismic. It's not fully unexpected what happened in Colorado 1, but there was a chance that Melat Quiros was going to win. She has now unseated a Democratic incumbent. What are you hearing?
What I'm hearing from, moderates, people who are always hopeful that the kind of status quo will live on, is that there's a bit of a fear, right? What the fear portends is unclear, but what I'm hearing from folks is we thought our folks were safe. They didn't have to do a lot this time around to make sure that they stayed safe. That's not true. But what I'm also hearing from especially younger voters, what I'm hearing from folks who are a bit more progressive is kind of, we told you so. And by that, it means, they want to see candidates who are exciting. They want to see candidates who promise to do big things. They want to see candidates that promise an accountability to Donald Trump and all of the things that he and his allies are doing around the United States. And so as someone who covers this stuff really closely, I know we hear a lot of people say, "Oh my God, the Democratic Socialists are taking over the Democratic Party." What I'm actually seeing, right, because you're seeing moderates win in other places, you're seeing the same thing that politics has always been about: exciting candidates who are getting people out to vote, who are making promises and will probably make good on those promises, going against folks who have been there maybe a little bit too long, depending on who you ask, and most importantly, who apparently have not done the job that the constituents want them to do. And this is what primary season is about. Republicans have had this issue for years. Democrats have gotten a little comfortable, I think. When I talk to Democrats who've been in the game for a long time, they admit to being comfortable, to the idea that, the incumbent, like was just said, that the incumbent's going to be okay. That is no longer the case. And so that means you will have to deliver when you actually get there. Will that change the Democratic Party? It's structurally unclear, but there's only 100,000 registered Democratic Socialists of America members. And so just to put that in context for people, like they're not taking over the Democratic Party.
Yeah, well, this is what I want to ask you, because I think, and you and I were together, remember November last year when Zoran Mamdani won in New York, and it happened so fast we didn't get a chance to really dig into the exit polls. But a lot of people who voted for him didn't care that he was a Democratic Socialist, do not identify as Democratic Socialists themselves. They identified with free buses and lower rent.
Right. Affordability, right? Because at the end of the day, people are more willing than they used to be in politics to take a chance, to vote for someone who maybe they wouldn't have voted for in the past, aka President Donald Trump, right? If you look at the polling from Donald Trump in November, you started to see more black voters, more black and brown voters, and men especially, move a little bit to the right. I don't think all of a sudden these men woke up and said, "I love Republicans," right? Like, show me a Republican and I'll vote for them. What they did was take a chance, because the issues and the problems that are facing the average voter's life are bigger than they used to be. They are looking around at rich people getting richer and them not doing so well in their own lives. And so they're going to be willing to go and vote for people who they wouldn't have voted for in the past. And they're not going to be stuck to this loyalty to a Democrat or a Republican. They might not even care about the label so much.
Abby, is this... this could be seen, depending on where you stand, as exciting, that there's new blood, that the Democratic Party is having a healthy discussion that should be had by a big tent party, or is there fear that the Democratic Party is being broken by these overthrows of incumbents?
Well, I mean, among incumbents, a source said that there's not a panic, but folks are sitting up and paying attention to their races. The Democratic Party has rewarded the seniority system to the point that it was, many people argue, abused. Only 2 years ago, we had the Joe Biden debate. But I think one thing, and this may be just jumping way too far, but a lot of Democrats have gotten through their primaries and survived. But I doubt many Democratic incumbents think they're going to have an easy race for the rest of their career. And also next cycle, we will have a raging presidential campaign that a lot of these races will be on the same ballot, and we'll have a huge amount of youth turnout, most likely. And so I don't think this is going to be a passing fad that Democratic incumbents who don't do anything more than send out a newsletter once a week are going to be able to sustain.
Well, I'm on the record. You guys both know that I think that healthy politics is where people have their fights and they debate it, but we're yet to be seen how this is all going to turn out. Abby does make the point that most Democratic incumbents who are running for re-election have won their seats. So earthquakey as it sometimes may sound, it's still just a few. Thanks to both you, Abby Livingston and Eugene Daniels. MS Now is back after a quick break.